Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here with you. I think I ought to just say I agree with everything David said and then sit back down again. That would work. Let me explain to you where I'm coming from. This year, 2009, marks the 48th year of my involvement in the developing countries. I lived 15 years in Nigeria. In my more jocular moments, I say that I've had the great good fortune in my career to be able to study corruption at the feet of the masters. After those 15 years, and I retained my business interest in Nigeria. In fact, I only sold my last company 2 years ago. But after those 15 years of residence in the country, my family and I moved back to the States, and I did business all over the rest of the developing world for another 20 years in Central America, South America, other parts of Africa, Asia. The People's Republic of China was our biggest customer, and so on. And I think that I have probably seen more corruption, more money laundering, more financial crime than any one of my acquaintance, and certainly more than any one person should see in a lifetime. So I decided 12 years ago that I wanted to say what I had to say about this subject matter. I received a grant from the MacArthur Foundation to do a study entitled Flight Capital, Poverty, and Free Market Economics, and segued into the think tank community. Now, let me be clear at the outset, I'm all for the free market system. I believe, having spent 35 years in business before moving into the think tank world, I believe in free trade, free currency convertibility, and free movement of capital. I do add a proviso to that, provided it's legal. It's the illegal components of these flows that have fascinated me for many years. Since the 1960s, we in the Western world have built and expanded an entire shadow financial system that facilitates the movement of illicit money across borders. Now, there were a few elements of this system before the 1960s, but they were not particularly important. The 1960s marked the takeoff point in the development of this structure for two reasons. First, it was the decade of independence. Between the late 1950s and the end of the 1960s, 48 countries gained their independence. And some of the economic and political elites in these countries wanted to take their money out by any means possible, and we in the West serviced that desire for flight capital with a great deal of creativity. The second reason the 1960s marked the takeoff point in the development of this structure was the spread of multinational corporations. Yes, there were international businesses before the 1960s, but typically an international oil company or trading company would have foreign operations in 12 or perhaps 15 countries. Beginning in the 1960s, corporations started planting their flags all over the planet, a process that has continued up to the present time. And many of these corporations utilized tax avoiding and tax evading techniques to take money out of developing countries and bring it into hard currency countries. But for these two reasons, decolonization and the spread of multinational corporations, the 1960s were the period when the development of this structure took off in earnest. This system now comprises a number of interrelated parts. Tax havens. I think you've heard about tax havens. There's been a good bit of pressure on tax havens in the G20 over the past a little more than a year. Tax havens are places where you can avoid taxes. You can establish entities that do not have to pay taxes. Many of these tax havens function as secrecy jurisdictions. That is to say, these are places where nominees and trustees can establish entities for you so that nobody knows who really owns the entity. These disguised entities, mostly corporations, now number in the millions around the world, where no one knows, other than the formation agent, no one knows who really owns the business. A lot of these disguised corporations are equipped with what we call flee clauses. That's spelled F-L-E-E, not the other way. And what this means is that if anybody comes knocking on the door trying to figure out who really owns the business, the nominees who direct the business can have it flee from one secrecy jurisdiction to another, always staying ahead of anyone trying to find out who owns the business. Anonymous trust accounts are part of this structure. Fake foundations are part of this structure. You can create a foundation, a charitable foundation. You can donate money to this charitable foundation, and you can designate yourself as the beneficiary of the charity of this foundation. Another one of the structures that's used in this business. False documentation is used on all sorts of transactions. Falsified pricing in international trade is by far the most frequently used component. This is most commonly mispricing of imports and exports for the purpose of shifting money across borders. All it takes to misprice a transaction is two people agreeing that instead of pricing the transaction at $100,000, we'll price it at $120,000, and when the extra $20,000 is paid, it will be diverted into a foreign bank account. Or on the other side, if it's an export out of a developing country, instead of pricing it at $100,000, you price it at $80,000 with the understanding that when the transaction is completed, that extra $20,000 will be deposited into a foreign bank account. This is done all the time, whether in arm's length transactions or within multinational entities. And then there are a lot of holes, a lot of money laundering techniques that are utilized to facilitate the flow of illicit money across borders. And finally, there are a lot of gaps in the laws of Western countries that allow that money to come through this shadow financial system that I have described and ultimately into our own economies. Canada, as a matter of fact, has quite a good law barring the inflow of illicit kinds of money. Canada's law says that if the activity abroad would have been illegal if that same activity is done in Canada, then it is illegal to knowingly handle the proceeds of that transaction. That's a very good law. The United States, on the other hand, has a very weak law. We bar only the incoming proceeds of drugs, corruption, and the proceeds of violence, including terrorist financing. It is legal to bring into my country proceeds generated abroad from handling stolen property and counterfeiting and contraband and slave trading and alien smuggling and trafficking in women and environmental crimes and all kinds of tax evading money and more. All of that can come legally into the United States. Inexcusable, but true. Now, let's deal with the definitional question. What is illicit money? Illicit money is money that is illegally earned, illegally transferred, or illegally utilized. If it breaks laws anywhere along the way in its origin, movement, or use, it merits the label. It comes in three forms. One, the proceeds of bribery and theft by government officials abroad. Two, the proceeds of criminal activities such as drugs and racketeering and trafficking and so forth. And three, the proceeds of commercial tax evasion. When I wrote my book, Capitalism's Achilles Heel, I used a series of survey methods to make an estimate of how big is this phenomenon. How much illicit money are we talking about? To estimate the proceeds of bribery and theft, I interviewed 335 people in 23 countries, central bankers, commercial bankers, Ministry of Finance officials, intelligence people, customs officers, economists, sociologists, and so forth, to get a handle on how much corrupt money are we talking about. And I put that together with literature search and came up with an estimate. To do the criminal component, I relied on the work of others. There are lots of organizations that estimate the flow of drug money, human trafficking, illegal logging, trading in illegal species, arms trading, and so forth. We put together a compilation of that. The commercial component I based on a survey that I had done earlier estimating the mispricing of trade. And I had done that piece of work based on 550 interviews with business owners and managers in 11 countries around the world. And what we did in that situation was to create a cover story as to what we were talking about, suggesting that we were doing a survey of trading practices globally as they're changing. And then we gave anonymity to the respondents. We did not record their names or their companies. We then asked questions about trade transactions from the beginning to the end, from inquiry to final delivery. And within those questions, we treated kickbacks, mispricing, as a well-understood and perfectly normal part of the transaction. And because we handled it in that way, we got good data. Arising from these three survey methods, I made an estimate of $500 to $800 billion a year of illicit money shifting out of developing countries. Now, interestingly, the proceeds of bribery and theft, what most people talk about is the corrupt component, but I tend to use the word corruption to apply to the other two as well. The proceeds in bribery and theft, the one that we like to point to regarding those corrupt government officials over there, the Abachas and the Mobutus and the Marcoses and the Suhartos and so forth, that's in the cross-border flow of illicit money. That's the smallest part. It's only about 3% of the global total. The criminal component is about 30 or 35% of the global total, and the commercially tax evading component is by far the largest at about 60 or 65% of the global total. That is how I produced the estimate in my book. Now, after my book was published and Global Financial Integrity was formed, we knew that the first thing we wanted to do was to produce a more sophisticated analysis of illicit financial flows. So, we hired an economist who had been 32 years at the IMF, a gentleman named Dev Carr, and we gave him carte blanche to do his analysis any way that he wanted to. And what Dev did was to use two economic models that have been around for many years, decades, and have been used by dozens of economists. By name, they are the World Bank Residual Method and IMF Direction of Trade Statistics. With these two models, Dev produced an estimate of $850 billion to $1 trillion a year, as David indicated. And even this estimate is conservative because using that published data that is made available by developing countries, and incidentally, we were the first people to take these economic models and apply them to data available from all the developing countries. We did not invent the models. Lots of economists have used them, as I said. We simply took these models and applied them to data available from all reporting developing countries. Because this is published data, there are some gaps in the data. For example, this estimate of $850 billion to $1 trillion a year does not include smuggling. Smuggling is not a part of this. It was in my original survey, but it is not a part of this. It does not include one of the forms of mispricing don't let me get too esoteric here, but IMF Direction of Trade Statistics, which analyze trading patterns between all pairs of countries, for instance, Canada and Argentina. You can look up and see how much export there has been out of Canada to Argentina, and how much does Argentina report as imports from Canada. And if you look at those two figures and subtract off freight and insurance, and look at the two remaining figures, if they're substantially different, the only way that can occur is mispricing. Those transactions have been re-invoiced. IMF Direction of Trade Statistics can reveal where transactions have been re-invoiced. IMF Direction of Trade Statistics do not indicate where the mispricing takes place within the same invoice as a result of the agreement between the buyer and the seller. If the invoice out of Canada and the invoice into Argentina is the same, except for adding the freight and insurance, if it's the same, you're still not sure whether that was the real price or there was some mispricing built into the invoice at the time that it left Canada. This survey did not include that. It also, this estimate does not include any estimation of services, because the data that is available only refers to merchandise trade. It does not refer to trade in services and intangibles. If you add back to our estimate of $850 billion to $1 trillion a year, those missing components, we're very comfortable saying that $1 trillion a year flows out of developing countries. Having said that, in every opportunity, every time we have an opportunity to talk about this, we urge other people to do their own analyses. We're not wedded to any number. What we are wedded to is getting the issue thoroughly on the political economy table. It doesn't matter to us whether the issue is $500 billion or $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion or where it is. We're within the order of magnitude, but we urge others to do their own surveys. This enormous outflow of illicit money from developing countries is the most damaging economic condition hurting the poor. I'm drawing a distinction between economic conditions and political and environmental conditions. Within the economic realm, nothing hurts the global poor so much as this outflow of illicit money from their countries. You're focused on the Asia-Pacific region. China is by far the largest exporter of illicit capital. China is also the largest exporter of illicit capital, so it works both ways. But China's average over the 5 years of our study, which was 2002 to 2006, China's average of illicit outflows was $233 billion a year. Saudi Arabia was $54 billion, Mexico $42, Russia $32, India $23 billion a year. We're talking about massive amounts of money that damage developing countries, and most of this money is a permanent outflow. China is a little bit of an exception. There's a fair amount of round-tripping. Money that goes illicitly out of China acquires a foreign nationality abroad as a company or trust fund or investment account and comes back into China as foreign direct investment. Who is the biggest promoter of this? A little Caribbean island, the British Virgin Islands. How did this come about? BVI looked across the waters at Cayman Islands in the 80s and was jealous of the Cayman Islands. So BVI sat back and said to themselves, what's left in the world for us to go after? And China, with the absorption of Hong Kong, was a tempting target. So British Virgin Islands officials went to Hong Kong, called on business people there, offered their money laundering services, their illicit financial flows services, attracted a great many Hong Kong customers, and then when Hong Kong was reabsorbed into China, moved on into China. BVI, the British Virgin Islands, is the largest source of foreign direct investment going into China, other than Hong Kong, and of course Hong Kong has been reabsorbed. Hong Kong is the largest source of FDI. BVI is the largest source of, after Hong Kong, is the largest source of financing going into China. This is almost exclusively Chinese illicit flight capital that has come out, gotten the foreign nationality in BVI, and come back again, round-tripping. Now, let me take a moment to relate what I have been talking about concerning the developing countries to the current global financial crisis. This shadow financial system, which I have described, comprising a number of elements, this system has now come home to roost in our Western economies, in our more developed economies. Part of what is so frightening about the current global financial crisis is that we have no idea how big it is. We have no idea how much bad paper in the form of subprime mortgages and derivatives contracts and credit default swaps and so forth, how much of that is hidden away in tax havens, in secrecy jurisdictions, in offshore banks that can operate without any capital requirements whatsoever. In Canada and the United States, any bank has to maintain a certain level of capital in ratio to its outstanding loans. In offshore facilities, you do not have to maintain any ratio. You can operate without any capital requirements. Hedge funds choose to operate in the Cayman Islands because the Cayman Islands requires no accounting or filing or reporting requirements on such hedge funds. Cayman Islands Monetary Authority brags on its website that it is the home to 10,000 what it calls collective investment schemes. That's their terminology. And that is primarily hedge funds. The fact of the matter is this shadow financial system that I have been describing now affects us, and it prevents you from knowing to what your money is being devoted and who is receiving such money. Now, can anything be done about this massive problem? We also direct an organization called the Task Force on Financial Integrity and Economic Development. And this is a consortium of governments and NGOs and foundations, more than 60 in number, who are focusing on this issue of illicit financial flows and its impact. The solutions that we have adopted are all couched around the need for greater transparency in the global financial system. The need to get rid of the shadows, to get rid of the shadow financial system and introduce transparency into the global financial system. So we've adopted 5 priorities that direct our work, all grouped around the concept of transparency. First of all, automatic exchange of tax information across borders. The United States and Canada exchange tax information across the border. Within the European Union, tax information is exchanged. For example, if a citizen of Germany has an account in France, then France is obligated to report the earnings on that account back to Germany. At the present time, in the EU, this refers only to individuals. There are moves to broaden it to corporations and trust funds and foundations, and to make it applicable not only to interest-bearing accounts, but other forms of income as well. Automatically exchanging that information across borders. The EU model should serve as the model for the rest of the world. The second priority that we've adopted is country-by-country reporting of sales and profits and taxes paid by multinational corporations and financial institutions. Right now, a corporation simply reports its global results. You have no idea how much of that was earned in Nigeria or India or Japan or where have you. You can't break it down. Country-by-country reporting would change that situation. Country-by-country reporting would eliminate a great deal of the trade mispricing that moves so much money out of developing countries. Third priority that we've adopted is know the beneficial owners of every entity that is doing business across borders. It is ridiculous that there are millions of disguised entities. There are banks here in the United States, all across Europe, Asia, and so forth, that could be doing business with criminal organizations and terrorists and never know it. That's an unacceptable situation. Every financial institution should know who are the flesh and blood beneficial owners of the entities with which they're doing business. The fourth priority that we've adopted is the curtailment of the mispricing of trade, which I said to you moves more illicit money across borders than any other mechanism. Now, this may sound terribly complex. Goodness, how do you require a bunch of multinational corporations to curtail their mispricing? It's in fact straightforward. The key to this is to understand that the goal is to curtail, not to try to stop this, but to curtail it substantially. You can do that with two signatures, the signature of the buyer and the signature of the seller, on a paragraph in the commercial invoice that says the price accords to world market norms. There is no manipulation of the price for the purpose of varying VAT taxes, customs duties, or income taxes. And there is no violation of the anti-money laundering laws, banking regulations, or exchange control statutes in any country where the transaction originates, through which it passes, or into which it arrives. Two signatures will curtail a substantial amount of the trade mispricing that takes place. Multinational corporations in particular would be very hesitant to have a conversation about manipulating prices for the purpose of avoiding VAT taxes, customs duties, or income taxes. Having that conversation and then turning around and asking their people to sign a piece of paper that says they never had such a conversation. I'd be very hesitant to do that. Curtailing is the goal, and curtailing can be accomplished with two signatures. And then the last priority that we have adopted in the task force is the harmonization of anti-money laundering laws across all countries. It is unacceptable that the United States remains legally open to so many forms of illicit money. It is unacceptable that other countries are porous to varying degrees. All countries that cooperate in an anti-money laundering effort should have the same list that Canada has, which says if it's illegal over there, it's illegal for you to do the same thing to handle that kind of money in our countries. These 5 priorities will go a long way toward curtailing illicit financial flows, will go a long way toward retaining capital in developing countries. Let me close with one note, because you pay a lot of attention to human rights concerns. We have been concerned in our work that this issue has not been more prominent on the human rights agenda. The human rights agenda has been largely focused on civil and political rights. We are taking a step to begin to alter that dialogue. We're putting on a conference at Yale in December, hosted by ourselves and Thomas Pogge. If you know who Thomas Pogge is, a philosopher at Yale. He was a student of John Rawls. He's written extensively on Rawlsian philosophy. Rawls, of course, wrote the book A Theory of Justice in 1971. Thomas Pogge has been an extremely active human rights advocate, focusing primarily on the needs for medicines in developing countries, specialized medicines in developing countries to meet their disease. Pogge has been extremely active. We're putting on a conference at Yale in May, bringing together for the first time, as far as we know, human rights groups and our illicit financial flows community to share an agenda about the impact of what we're talking about on human rights, and quite honestly attempting to draw the human rights community further into the business of addressing issues of economic deprivation. We're very much looking forward to that conference, and we have people coming from Global Witness, Oxfam, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, and a lot of other groups as well. But we're very much trying to push what we're talking about onto the agenda of the human rights community. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd be happy to answer any questions you've got. I've enjoyed visiting with you.
We have run out of time. We've got 15 minutes dedicated for this presentation. It's been a really good discussion and questions. I don't want to cut it off if people have more questions. I think Raymond will also be here, and you can sort of buttonhole him during the break if you have more points to raise. I wanted to ask one question myself, and that was simply about tax havens. Because the impression is that all tax havens are these little offshore islands someplace, like the Cayman Islands or British Virgin Islands. But my understanding is there are also cities in developed countries that become tax havens. Am I right in that?
Yes. Within that 90 tax havens around the world, we include the state of Delaware, the state of Nevada, we include the city of London, we include Manhattan, we include other entities, because you can perform the work of a tax haven sitting many thousands of miles away, so that the tax haven entity is nothing more than a computer terminal where you can ostensibly send stuff in and take stuff back out again. So it's a bit ridiculous to say that Nauru is a tax haven when the city of London is not. Nauru consists of nothing but computers, and it in fact closed down the computers, so it's no longer a tax haven. But the city of London can facilitate those kinds of transactions, and indeed, even beyond that, the city of London, the UK, can give tax benefits to depositors from foreign countries, can give tax advantages to depositors from other countries. So it is accurate to put us in the same category in many cases.
Any cases in Canada?
You've got a little island off the coast of Newfoundland somewhere that has been referred to as a tax haven, and I can't remember the name of the island, but
we should know.
You say that it's part of France?
Miquelon is French territory.
What's the name of it?
Saint-Pierre and Miquelon.
I think that's it. I think that's it.